Well, now we're going to talk about exploratory research. And I think one of the best ways to think about exploratory research is that it's used to provide background, clarity, context, or depth of understanding on a research topic. And one of the ways that I like to think about exploratory research is that we're going into a place where we don't really have a lot of information and we're exploring. You know, those words go together. Let me give you a great example. So earlier this year, I had to go to South Carolina for a conference. And normally when I'm going to a place that I haven't been, I do some research. But in this case, I was going to Charleston, South Carolina, downtown, staying in a hotel where the conference was being held, and I just didn't bother to look around and find out what was going on. And so I got to my hotel the night before my conference, and I needed to walk around a little bit, so I decided to go outside and go for a walk. And I really had no idea where I was or what I was looking at as I was walking. So I had to begin to make some deductions and begin to try to understand what I was seeing. So first of all, as I walked outside my hotel, I saw that I was in a shopping district, and it was a shopping district with a lot of high-end stores like you might find in a nice mall. They were all outdoors, they all had their own storefronts, and they were all closed. So I reasoned that, okay, on weeknights maybe these stores you know, don't do so well, and therefore they don't stay open that late. And so I started walking down the street, and I was hoping, as I was walking down the street, that I would start to find some restaurants because I was getting pretty hungry, but I had no idea. And so I walked, and I saw that as I was walking that I was beginning to see the quality of the stores began to go from, you know, high-end mall stores to more touristy kind of places. And sure enough, I did start to see some restaurants. They were, you know, the typical chain restaurants that you'd find in a touristy kind of area. And I saw that there were a lot of really young people around. I mean, a lot of people look like 18, 19 years old. And, you know, normally when you're in cities, you see people that are a little bit older than that walking around at night, not just people in that really narrow age band. And I thought, wow, you know, Charleston must be doing a really good job of getting young people to move into like rehabbed loft apartments and things like that, because everybody here just looks really young. And then I turned the corner and realized that the reason everybody looked really young is because there's a college downtown right around the corner, and a lot of these students were out getting dinner. And I also saw these guys walking around that they looked kind of funny to me. They all had shaved bald heads, and they were all wearing really plain, nondescript gray jackets and pants. And immediately I thought, wow, there must be a cult walking around. You know, one of those weird cults where they shave their heads and they wear plain clothes and they go around and talk about their god from the moon, or, you know, whatever. And it just seemed really strange to me that I was seeing so many of them. They were all men, all guys, you know, young guys in their 18, 19-year-old age range. And as I thought about it a little bit more, I realized, wait a minute, some of these guys have hats, and they're hats that look like military hats. Oh, maybe there's a military academy here in town, and these are cadets. And sure enough, I asked somebody, and that was the case. These were cadets. Military school, out getting dinner, not people in a cult. I saw a lot of other things as I was walking around, and gradually I began to understand more and more about what I was seeing as I was walking around Charleston. And I began to put things together. One of the things that made me kind of do a double take was I walked past a place called the Cougar Club, and I saw a middle-aged woman standing outside smoking a cigarette, looking like she was on the prowl for younger guys. Well, Cougars was the name of one of the local sports teams, so it probably had more to do with that. As I explored, I began to learn more. I began to learn it from a first-person perspective. I wasn't listening to what other people had to say. I wasn't developing opinions just based on what I was reading in a travel book or anything like that. I was developing them firsthand, and that is a form of exploratory research. Now, often in exploratory research, we do ask people what they think or what they feel or how they experience things, but we go into a lot of detail. We really ask them to give us a lot of depth of information, and that's another form of exploratory research. It's often very qualitative. Sometimes in exploratory research, we also look at secondary data. So you guys have all been given an assignment in this class to go and get background information on an industry that you're going to be working for in your class project. And that is also a form of exploratory research. You're going out and learning what is already known about this field and what sorts of published information is there that we can rely on to help us have a deeper understanding of it. And that's also a form of exploratory research that can be really useful. So there are 4 main reasons that are talked about in your textbook for conducting exploratory research. One is to gain background information, so that you can try to have enough information to help ensure that when you're trying to solve a marketing problem, that you know enough about the context or about what's been done, what's been tried, what's known, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can also try to define terms. A lot of times there's a big difference in terminology between what an organization uses and what its customers use, or what the consumers who might become customers one day are using. And I've used the example in class, with the healthcare industry, the word quality has a very different meaning if you are a person working in the healthcare industry or if you are a consumer. Consumers, healthcare quality often means, are the windowsills in my hotel room clean? Does the place smell like pee? Things like that. Was the doctor nice to me? To a medical professional, quality often has much more to do with clinical outcome and keeping infection rates down and things like that. So defining terms is a very useful application of exploratory research. Clarifying problems and hypotheses is another use, and it's something that we talked about in our class discussion, that there are times where we have a research problem that we don't really understand and we only really can see the symptoms. So exploratory research can help us to get beneath those symptoms and to begin to understand what the problem is. Also, there are times where we can develop hypotheses based on the symptoms and problems that we anticipate might be existing in our marketing context, but we really need to make sure that they're realistic and that they're grounded in fact and not just in our intuition. And so we can refine our hypotheses by really learning more about as much as possible that's going on within our marketing environment. And that way our hypotheses they have some bearing on reality, and they're not just kind of up in the sky, really academic type of ideas, but they're really more about the application that we're ultimately looking to make. And then we can establish our research priorities by conducting exploratory research. And what I mean by that is that we can, if we have several problems that we need to solve, we can figure out which ones are the most pressing and which ones are things that are a little bit more on the nice to know end of things. There might be times too where there are problems that have a more immediate need to be resolved, and others that they're important, but they can wait because they don't have the sense of urgency associated with them. And exploratory research can help us to identify those priorities and make sure that we conduct research in the right order. So some methods that are used for exploratory research include secondary data analysis, which is where we look at data that are available from other printed research, and that can come from research projects that are being made available for purchase or for free, that talk about other problems that other organizations were facing or that our organization was facing in the past. It can also mean packaged or syndicated data. It can also mean looking at media sources, periodicals, journal articles, things like that might be able to give us some understanding or some context. It can even mean to some extent going out and looking at kind of raw social media data and things like that to just kind of get a feel for how consumer or customer sentiment is. We can also look at case analysis. Now, case analysis is a little different from secondary research in that it's generally more structured at, here is the, presenting the entirety of everything. Here was the problem that we were facing, here are the actions that we took, here was the outcome and the result, here are some of the tools that we used. Kind of similar to case studies that you might use in a business school textbook or business school class. Case analysis can be really useful. Now, you might also be able to conduct case analysis by going and listening to people speak, or by visiting a organization and kind of asking them what they've been through, or by going through a formal class where you do case studies. There are all kinds of different ways to conduct case analysis, but that's also a very valuable form that's similar in a lot of ways to secondary research. Now, a common form of exploratory research is doing some kind of in-depth interview or experience survey. Now, I want you to be careful when you hear the word survey here, because we're going to use the word survey primarily to describe descriptive research. But experience surveys are kind of a different beast because they're generally administered to a very small, selected group of people, often that have a high amount of experience with the product or service that you're talking about. So you might, for example, ask your best customers to take a detailed survey about your product or service so that they can give you some ideas for improvement, or they can give you some ideas for expansion into new markets or things like that. That would be an experience survey, talking to people that are really knowledgeable, what we call key informants. Depth interviews can be done with people that are a little bit less knowledgeable, but they have a lot to say. So, I might conduct a 30, 40, 50-minute interview with a consumer about all of their opinions about a service that I'm studying or a product that I'm studying, and they will have to go through a long line of questioning and a lot of what we call probing, where I follow up on my questions with more questions that are trying to get them to give me a full range of detail about what it is that I want to know and what they're saying. And depth interviews often are very lengthy. They're very difficult and tedious for the respondent, and for that matter for the interviewer, but they get a lot of information, and they usually leave no stone unturned. We go as deep as we can to try to get as much information as possible out of each respondent. And then another technique that we often use are focus groups. Now, you guys have been through a focus group in our class just to kind of see what it's like. Focus groups are great for brainstorming, they're great for idea generation, they're great for testing how a group of people will respond to a topic. Looking at the social dynamics, looking at how people respond to what each other say. Focus groups are actually one of the most misapplied forms of research, if you ask me, and I say this as a focus group moderator, but they do have a lot of uses, and they are quite interesting and dramatic to watch a lot of times. Really, they can be really dynamic. So they do have their uses, and we'll talk about them more when we talk about qualitative research in our next series.